So this is important because it demonstrates how powerful elites have been at the center of the manufacture of anti-Muslim hatred across the world, something that is still being manufactured by elites today. This is going to be taken directly from the Epstein files that have been recently released and continues to shock the world. I have a video with Dilly Hussein from 5 Pillars that you can watch here. It goes and explains a broad overview of these files and how we should react and understand them. So what does Epstein files say about how Jeffrey Epstein himself and also these billionaire elites that he was associating with, how they viewed Islam and Muslims? Well, here's one such email from Dr. Bob Shillman. The email was titled, "Islam Finally, Some Protest Against Islamification." It's a link to a protest by Femen, and Shillman writes, "Maybe the world is starting to wake up. I wake up to Islamification." So who is Bob Shillman? He is Dr. Robert Shillman, a US tech billionaire from a Zionist or pro-Zionist Jewish background who regularly funds pro-Zionist causes. But he also finances Tommy Robinson, the well-known paid-for-hire anti-Muslim pro-Zionist shill. He paid him £5,000 a month to be a fellow at Rebel News. Now, Rebel News is an anti-Muslim, anti-Islam news channel that stokes up hatred and fear against Muslims, and which is also funded by Bob Shillman. In fact, Bob Shillman is a regular contributor to other anti-Muslim hate preachers like Katie Hopkins in Britain, who called migrants cockroaches and regularly demonizes Muslims. And then there's the crazed and anti-Muslim commentator Laura Loomer, who is also paid by Bob Shillman too. This is what I mean by capitalist elite billionaires who spend money, sponsor individuals to manufacture hatred against Muslims. Then we have this email from Bill Siegel, a venture capitalist lawyer, again from a Jewish background, who wrote a book called The Control Factor: Our Struggle to See the True Threat. And what is the true threat? Well, here's an email to Epstein, which was taken from an interview that Bill Siegel did. And it makes clear what he sees as the true threat or the true enemy. Simply stated, our Islamic enemy seeks the totalitarian domination of Islam throughout the world, Islamic supremacy. It seeks to have the West submit to Islam. Then we have this email forwarded by Jeffrey Epstein's brother, whose nickname is Ismo in the emails. He forwards an email from Philip Kafka, a prominent Jewish Zionist in America, in which he states, "We have been busy attending rallies against the sick Islamification of our America. Bridget Gabriel, next to Merrill at the book signing, brought me to tears. She is brave, brilliant, and a truth-telling crusader." And anybody who knows about Bridget Gabriel knows she is quite clearly an anti-Muslim propagandist. So who is Philip Kafka? He's a rich real estate owner whose net worth is probably around or just over $1 billion. He's also a strong, avid supporter for Zionism. Do you see the pattern here? Philip Kafka, Bill Siegel, Bob Shillman, Jeffrey Epstein, rich connected individuals with strong pro-Zionist leanings. The files show a clear connection, therefore, between these billionaires who engage in polemics against Islam and who also fund anti-Muslim shills like Tommy Robinson or Laura Loomer, and who also fund news channels to attack Islam and Muslims. And while we're talking about Tommy Robinson, here's a message exchange between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein. In it, Bannon states to Epstein saying that he, i.e. Tommy Robinson, is the backbone of England and also he's cheap at any price. Again, for those who don't know, Steve Bannon was part of Trump's administration in his first term in office and was the architect of what was called the Muslim travel ban. Steve Bannon was also executive chairman for Breitbart, a right-wing anti-Muslim and very much anti-Muslim news website. You can see how close his ties are with Jeffrey Epstein in this interview that he actually engaged with Jeffrey Epstein in order to try to rehabilitate his image. This again was back in 2018, 10 years after this convicted paedophile and sex trafficker, was imprisoned, at least for a short period of time, and was facing further charges in regards to sex trafficking and paedophilia. So we have a pro-Zionist billionaires backing and funding anti-Muslim shills in order to foster anti-Muslim hatred. This is what's being shown. But Epstein's association with pushing anti-Muslim hatred goes even further. Back in the 2000s, at the height of what was called the War on Terror, which in reality was a war against Islam or a war of terror, which resulted in hundreds of thousands of Muslims being killed by Western forces, a new so-called intellectual movement emerged, one that was led by Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Lawrence Krauss, Daniel Dennett, and others, and they began taking aim specifically against Islam and Muslims. Dawkins described Islam as the greatest force of evil in the world. Harris described Islam as motherlode of bad ideas. Dennett described religions, including Islam, as a cultural virus. Krauss, most notably, would attempt to debate various Muslims over the truthfulness of the belief in God. Pinker claimed that Islam is the cause of the violence that's been seen across the Muslim world. All of them formed the New Atheist movement. All of them, with one way or another, had connections and relations with Jeffrey Epstein. Remember, the New Atheist movement emerged in the backdrop of what was called the War on Terror. These so-called intellectuals were attempting to provide moral and intellectual justification for invasion and occupation and the dehumanizing treatment of Muslims, not only in the Muslim world, but also in the West too, with the implementation of draconian laws under the term anti-terror legislation and counteracting extremism. In other words, they were propagandists justifying invasions, wars, bombings and occupations of Muslim lands, and they attempted to present Islam and Muslims as this existential threat against human civilization. Hence you had atheists like Sam Harris justifying preemptive targeting of Muslims, even if they haven't undertaken any criminal actions, but because they hold dangerous ideas, or arguing for torture and preemptive nuclear strike against Muslims in Mecca. And all of these people from New Atheist movements, all of them had ties and relations to Jeffrey Epstein. Here's an email from Krauss in which he mentions he'll set up a meeting with Dawkins and Pinker. Note, this is in 2014. Epstein was already convicted, had already spent some time in prison. This was back in 2008 when he was convicted and spent time in prison. So it's well known that they were associating with a convicted paedophile, a convicted sex trafficker by this time, that they still didn't see that as a problem from engaging or maintaining their relations with Jeffrey Epstein. Here's a picture of Richard Dawkins seated next to Epstein. Dawkins also mentions how he and Richard Dennett were flown to a location on Epstein's private jet called Lolita Express. For those who don't know, Lolita is the name of a book about a middle-aged man who becomes obsessed with his 12-year-old daughter and kidnaps and basically abuses her, sexually abuses her. That's in the book, and that's pretty depraved. And that's the name that Jeffrey Epstein decides to call his jet, his private jet. Lawrence Krauss is also significantly featured in Epstein files. He sends emails to Epstein gloating over converting people to atheism. Here's one of a 16-year-old boy, and another one about converting a westernized non-practicing Muslim to atheism. Sam Harris is also featured in the emails where Epstein invites him to have a private dinner with himself and Woody Allen. Woody Allen, by the way, is a famous director who was accused of having sexual relations with his adopted daughter when she was still a child, and whom he later married. Lawrence Krauss himself resigned over sexual harassment allegations at Arizona State University. He also faced other accusations of improper conduct, particularly against young women. And by the way, even Richard Dawkins himself was unable to condemn the idea of mild paedophilia. And he recounts a particular story where a teacher used to touch up and feel up boys at his school, including himself. And he didn't think it was a big deal at the time. Again, we see a pattern emerging of individuals who are either accused of sexual misconduct or have justified various sexual misconducts, that these types of individuals are gravitating towards Jeffrey Epstein. But what also unites these people, I'm talking about Sam Harris, Dawkins, Krauss, Dennett, Pinker, who either met with Epstein or had at the very least email exchanges and invitation by Epstein, was their shared hatred of Islam and Muslims. So Epstein is not only associating with rich capitalist pro-Zionist elites who fund anti-Muslim hatred, but he's also bringing together a network of atheist academics to demonize Islam and Muslims as though Muslims and Islam are the most, evil people on the face of the earth. Then we have this email, and perhaps it's one of the most significant documents that shows how Epstein was viewed by those looking to counteract Islam. In fact, this scandal hasn't been emphasized enough, I don't think. It's from Landon Thomas Jr. He's the member of a board of trustees from Robert College, based in Turkey. Here, he's requesting funds to help counteract the rise of conservative Islam in Turkey. This, remember, is back in 2014, after Epstein's conviction. Basically, they're requesting money and network connections from a convicted paedophile and sex trafficker. They didn't see anything wrong with that. Now, why do I say this is one of the biggest scandals brought up in the Epstein files, particularly for Muslims and the Muslim world? Because Robert College was originally set up in Turkey in 1863 by missionaries. Initially, it was only open to Christian students, but during the Young Turk secularization movement that began during the early part of the 20th century, they also opened the college up to Muslims and Turks. It received massive private funding and has been accused of attempting to secularize and liberalize Muslim populations in Turkey, particularly among the rich Turkish elite. Consistently, Robert College has claimed it's mainly funded by student fees and it doesn't have any ulterior agenda. However, this email demolishes that claim. Not only are they receiving funds from a convicted paedophile based in America, but are also wanting to gain funds in order to curb the rise of conservative Islam, basically wanting to see less practicing Muslims. And what makes this even more astonishing is that Landon Thomas Jr. also asked Epstein whether he could put him in connection with other billionaire donors like Bill Gates from the Gates Foundation. You see, this is opening up a network of elites funding Islamophobes and anti-Muslim propagandists to curb the rise of Islam within not just the West, but also in the Muslim world. And if you want any more proof of the attitudes Epstein and his associates had about Islam, here's an email from Epstein's partner in crime and girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is the daughter of the Mossad agent Robert Maxwell. This is what she wrote, as a joke apparently. It is the year 2032. A father and his son walk the streets of Lower Manhattan, approaching the site where the WTC used to be in the end of the 20th century. The father sighs and comments to think that right here used to be the Twin Towers. The son, not understanding, asks his father, "What are the Twin Towers?" The father smiles and looks at his son and explains the Twin Towers were two huge buildings that used to be here until 2001 when the Arabs destroyed them. The son looks up to his father and asks, "What are the Arabs?" You know, this is meant to be a joke, but you don't joke about genocide and wiping out an entire people from Earth. This just shows you the attitude that they had towards Muslims and Arabs generally. But this isn't just about non-Muslim pro-Zionist capitalist elite. Here's an email from Sultan bin Sulayem, who is the CEO of Dubai Ports. Yeah, UAE again. While he tries to argue that not all Muslims are bad, he also argues that Muslims are a problem or have at least a significant extremism problem amongst their midst. Here's an email which he forwards an article by CNN host Fareed Zakaria claiming that Muslims have an extremism problem that they need to deal with. And here's another email in which he states, "A friend of mine went to the mosque in Saudi. He said, with all these terrorists, frankly, you can't tell whether the guy standing next to you is just scratching his balls or fiddling with the detonator button." Pretty disgusting statement, isn't it? And just so we can see the attitudes of the ruling class in Muslim countries, here's an email exchange where he's trying to explain the Quran in one breath and then says he's about to sample 100% female Russian at his yacht in another breath. Remember, he's communicating with a convicted paedophile and sex trafficker. He needs to have some shame. So what do we glean from all of this?